Hello everyone, it's great to see you all here. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Andrew Thorpe. I'm a professor in modern history at the university, but I'm also the Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures, of which the School of PCI is a wonderful and exciting part. Well, I first met Joslin in early 2020. I'd recently joined the university and we were in the early stages of recruiting a new head of school. And she and Ben Walmsley were the school representatives in that process. And in those early days, I was meeting a lot of new people at once. But she and Ben really made a big impression on me as fantastic advocates for the school and huge assets for the university. Joslin was central to the recruitment process that resulted in a really good outcome, namely the appointment of Jonathan Pitchers as head of school. So I was therefore delighted when she came forward later that same year to be one of the faculty academic leads for student education, working with our brilliant Pro-Dean for Student Education, Mel Pridder, to provide leadership in the area of student access and support. And that's something that she's done with great aplomb really for the last 3 years, and made a terrific impact for the faculty. And you know, as Dean, you've got a massive faculty here, about 8,000 students, hundreds and hundreds of staff. But it's when you get the colleague like Joslin comes forward and takes on one of those really big, important roles that you really are very impressed. And as Mel says, and I totally agree, Joslin's provided exceptional leadership around student success and support, combining deep care for our students with a keen sense of operational and educational opportunity and constraint. Educational constraint, but there we are. She's helped the faculty schools to understand the complex student success data, has helped us to prioritise and set objectives, which are both meaningful and effective. She's championed year-round welcome induction and transition, and the role of the academic personal tutor. And she's always kept care for people at the forefront of her work, be it academics, students or professional services staff. As a result, she's trusted and respected in the faculty and beyond it. She's been a deft and supportive facilitator of our innovative student advisory board from its very inception. This groundbreaking intervention improves our ability to hear the voices of students, particularly from marginalised backgrounds. And she supported this group to be a powerhouse really for change across the faculty and to be an exemplar for the whole university. We've been therefore very fortunate to have her, very fortunate that we've still got her for a little bit longer, I think, in that role. But she's going to step away from that and do other things. But really it's important, I think, to say that it's people such as Joslin who really make a faculty function. It can't function just by people like me turning up in a jacket every now and then. It really does need a serious level of commitment from really outstanding academics. And I'm now going to hand over to Chris, who's going to tell you more about why she is indeed one of our outstanding academics.
Thank you.
Over to you, Chris.
I think most of you know I'm Chris Baugh. I'm the Emeritus Professor of Performance and Technology of PCI. I've got a dual function tonight because I have a great pile of notes from Scott Palmer, the close collaborator, as you all know, of Joslin, who can't be here, who's recovering from surgery successfully. But he insisted on giving me these large notes and insisting that I present them. I've edited them securely because there's 12 pages.
It's longer than my script.
Exactly, so I'll do my very best to speed up. And then I've just got one page of my own comments that I would very much like to make on behalf of Joslin. But we have to take criticism of Scott when we start, because believe it or not, his first note is Joslin is the oldest serving academic member of the staff in PCI. That may or may not be true, but I think we'll go with the longest serving. Joslin took a degree in theatre design at Nottingham Trent, where she was taught by David Cockayne, who is here today, which at the time was certainly one of the leading course for training professional designers. She got an Arts Council bursary at the end and went to design at the Crucible, working for such iconic directors as the sadly dying very young Claire Venables and, well, not dying, but still iconic Stephen Daldry, working there. She did a PGCE and taught for a while art and design in schools. She joined the School of Theatre at Bretton Hall in January 1996. At that time, teaching theatre design and technology students. 6 months later, Scott joined, so that long collaboration. And it's been very difficult and really rather exciting to read the word we all the way through this. How close that professional collaboration has been and obviously is, and how productive. Towards the end of the 90s, she got her MA in theatre design, again at Nottingham, supervised by Malcolm Griffiths. During the time, that period of teaching at Bretton, she fought the corner, a very familiar corner, whereby students of designs, technical students, lighting, costume students, could often be seen as being service agents for people who were actors and directors, simply designing the things that actors needed for productions. And the battle for the integrity of scenography, for the idea that scenography is a discipline, a philosophy, an art in its own right, clearly began with those early arguments. We became a school of performance and cultural industries in 2001 as Bretton was absorbed into the University of Leeds, and Joslin was very much part of the negotiations and the decisions about how that was going to work and how the future would happen. And the BA programs relevant to scenography and technical theatre developed from that point. Either late in the 90s or early in the millennium, not quite sure when, at least I'm not quite sure when, and neither was Scott, Joslin embarked on her PhD, of which I'll speak more later because that's really quite crucial. But it was certainly the first PhD solely on the subject of scenography. 2005, the UK hosted OISTAT, which is the professional international organisation of scenographers, theatre architects and technicians. It's the major international body for those, very dominated by America. Where a joint paper led to a relationship with OISTAT such that there was a constant invitation to represent the subject towards Scott and Joslin at OISTAT conferences, etc. In 2006, Joslin and Scott instigated a new way for students to collaborate internationally via the web on an OISTAT Scenofest project, which involved linking students from the UK, USA, Finland and New Zealand together. It was a very early experiment in using the web to share imagery, to share models, to share ideas, etc. It seems very obvious. Scott's made a note. US students later asked why we didn't just use Facebook, but nobody had really heard of it in 2006. Joslin was an inaugural member of the Scenography Working Group of TAPRA, which is the leading research association, the Theatre and Performance Research Association. And as a result, the TAPRA conference was located to Leeds in 2010. Joslin was also again on the coordinating committee of the PSI, the Performance Studies International, which is one of the major international journals. That year in Utrecht, and it came to Leeds in 2012. 2008, 2009, she was the principal investigator on a project called Emerging Objects, emergent objects designed for the 21st century, which explored digital interventions in performance, and there was a relationship between PCI and computer technology, and Mick Wallace was another principal investigator on that. In 2015, probably the most significant international symbol of esteem, if you like, Joslin received was to be invited to be the lead jurist on the panel of the Prague Quadrennial, which is a 4-yearly, as I'm sure most of you know, is a 4-yearly exhibition of performance design and theatre architecture. And she was invited to be the lead jurist on that. In 2016, Joslin was recognised in the University of Leeds Women of Achievement Awards. She was appointed also the series co-editor of the new Bloomsbury Methuen Performance and Design series. I'm trying to cut this goes on forever. She's a member of the Arts and Humanities Research Council and a member of TAPRA Executive. And then there's a list of the school roles: Director of Learning and Teaching, Deputy Head of School, Acting Director of Research and Innovation, Acting Head of School on behalf of Alice O'Grady, and she's the research group leader for the group Place. Just a few more yellow highlights from these pages. Joslin and Scott sent out a list of their books and their papers and their articles to universities around the world, saying, what do these books mean to you? What's interesting about them? Do you use them in your teaching? Are they of any value to you? And there are some remarkable returns, as it were, feedback from international. Here's one from a USA, I think it's from Omaha. These are critical texts in the growing body of literature on scenography. These titles are part of a set reading list for international PhD education and have high impact factors within the field. The work coming out of Leeds is seminal in regards to new publications that are being written at the moment. And then again, the bibliography of works emerging from the University of Leeds provides a framework for students to begin their explorations of the role of scenographic practice as a mode of cultural and intellectual analysis and practice. Again, another one, these seminal scenographic texts, particularly the book-length studies, have become the foundation for speaking about scenography throughout the Anglo-American markets, etc., etc., etc. Just one final thing that I will take from Scott's note was that in 2015, when Joslin was the leading jurist of the panel of the Prague Quadrennial, it was later decided that because the reach of the Prague Quadrennial was so huge, that would form the basis of an impact case study for Ref 21. And these are just a few quotes from Sodia Lodka, who was the artistic director of the Prague Quadrennial at the time, and who was the coordinator, if you like, of the impact case study from the profession. PQ is the foremost international organisation in the field of scenographic practice, responsible for exhibitions, educational projects, collaborations and professional networking to promote the creative development of performance design worldwide. The project partners were 12 major European theatre organisations and universities, 10 countries, 78 events, symposia, residences, festivals, workshops, etc. In the UK, Poland, Macedonia, Finland, Italy, Norway. Over 65,000 people participated in those events, and that formed the basis of the impact case study, which was really the collaboration of Joslin and Scott. When Sodia Lodka stepped down from being artistic director of PQ after the 2015 edition, she went to the Prague Theatre Academy and instigated a new master's program. And she says, McKinney's idea that scenography, space, objects and materials can be experienced through bodily empathy, and that can have an effect consciously and subconsciously on the experience of the dramaturgy of performance, has influenced and affected the entire development of that programme. That's all I'm going to read of Scott's, and I would just like to add, because I'd like to say just a few words about Joslin, her research, and the importance of stuff. It's said that the ultimate signifier of scholarship is to be able to hover above the subject, the detail of the subject, and to locate it within a broad philosophical context. But in order to do that, you need a deep relationship with your subject before you can actually hover above it and philosophize, so to speak, about it. So it's absolutely central that Joslin trained formally as a stage designer in Nottingham and spent a decade working professionally. Important because this gave a deep practical and almost an embodied engagement with the stuff of scenography. Now, the professional designer sits at their work table, and what they're doing probably is to transform feelings, responses into stuff, perhaps with some representation of the place of performance before them, a model box, if you like, of the theatre or the studio or the site-specific location or whatever. Thinking about stuff they need in order to create a space of performance within the architectonic place of performance. About the way the priorities of different stuff may shift in performance. A beam of coloured light, the hang of a garment, the position of a scene, a prop, or the shadow of an actor's nose on a piece of scenery. So the designer's stuff before them on the workspace will be colours, paints, dyes, balsa wood, cardboard, plastics, found materials, things, sounds and lights, atmospheres, smoke and mist, clothes to talk about and to try on, stuff to take into rehearsal, to provoke, and maybe to serve as a basis for improvisation and exercise. In many ways, defining and ordering stuff comprises the making of theatre. Luckily, about 50 years ago or thereabouts, we began to use the word scenography to reflect the complexity of this bringing of stuff together. Scenographus, literally drawing with the scene, and the scene is built from stuff. And luckily for us, we now have a professor of scenography here at Leeds with a keen interest in that stuff. The process of choosing, making, placing and sharing stuff, it's a shame, I've always thought, that we don't have a verb to theatre. But crucially, and this is where Joslin's practice research is making such a very significant impact and important contribution, because it's about sharing with an audience. The spectator relates with the stuff of the scenographer, and it is they who give meaning to stuff. Joslin says, the materials of scenography, space, light, sound, structures, objects, fabrics, textures and colours play a central role in audience experience. But crucially, it's not about making the spectator decode the hidden meaning of stuff. That would be patronising. That would be designing for Bletchley Park, if you like, requiring the audience simply to decode these symbols that we've set upon stage. The German director Heiner Müller in the mid-80s took this further and spoke provocatively about the audience relationship with the stuff of theatre. He said, there's a text and it's delivered, but it's not evaluated and not coloured and not interpreted either. It's just there. Then there's noise, and that's there too, and that is not interpreted. It's a democratic concept of theatre. Interpretation is the work of the spectator and is not to take place on stage. The spectator must not be absolved from this work. That's consumerism, capitalist theatre. right at the heart of Joslin's Scenography research project is a concern for the stuff of theatre making, for more centrally with its relationship and agency within the spectator's experience. The current formal definition of research is a process of investigation leading to new insights effectively shared. Now, Joslin's PhD, The Nature of Communication Between Scenography and the Audience, initiated her important and still ongoing process of research. She experimented with this process in the forest floor, from which emerging insights were fed back into the process and in turn produced newer, changing insights. She said materials act on each other and in combination produce a network of sensible matter, sensible matter is a wonderful phrase, very resonant, I think, of which the viewer can be part. So, the way the materials of scenography, space, light, sound, structures, objects, fabric, textures, colours, play a central role in audience experience have led Joslin towards articulating a phenomenology of materiality in performance, an articulation that is at once rigorous, original, and extremely significant. This process of research, essentially being formulated in a PhD lay at the heart of the Cambridge monograph, then the co-editing of the Scenography Expanded book of 2017, and the extensive and ongoing range of papers, book chapters, and conference presentations. As the few comments from overseas indicate, this is world-leading work that is held in the highest estimation and which has profound implications for understanding the role of scenography performance. So, Professor McKinney, we invite you to give your inaugural lecture.
So, thanks very much for those very fulsome introductions. And thank you all for coming to mark and to celebrate the occasion of me being made professor. I'm a professor of scenography, and that title may need some explaining, although Chris has already covered some of this. Let me just give you my version there. So, scenography is another word for theatre design. Oops, sorry. Paper's modelled here. And it's gained currency, I think particularly over the last 20 years. Until fairly recently, the contribution of design to performance wasn't recognised by critics or scholars as a serious topic for thinking about how theatre operates or how it makes meaning. You'd often hear comments like, good design serves the text, it supports actors, good design doesn't draw attention to itself. There has been a persistent wariness of design, concerns that it's frivolous and distracting, that it just excites and seduces audiences, but it isn't germane to proper drama or to profound insights about human condition. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Where theatre design might be thought of in terms of stage decoration or illustration of a location, something that happens in the background, scenography points to the dynamic interaction of elements, the orchestration of the performance environment, which, as Chris has just said, includes space, structure, light, colour, projection, sound, smell, fabrics, objects, materials. In sum, the performance of things which may or may not require play or performers. Over the last 25 years or so, a small but growing number of international researchers in scenography, and I'm one of them, have established that design for performance does more than serve and support. It might do things on its own terms, communicate through different media and materials, each in their own unique ways. Theatre maker Heiner Goebbels recognises this when he talks about a theatre where all of the elements maintain their own forces but act together. where they don't rely on the conventional hierarchy of means. For example, where a light can be so strong that you can only suddenly watch that light and forget the text, or where a costume speaks its own language. Paul Carter talks about the material thinking that is inherent in the making of artworks, and I would add in the viewing of artworks too. Carter says artworks are eloquent, but their way of communicating is not straightforward. And it's not an equivalence, there isn't an equivalence with language. It's four-dimensional, it's complex and ambiguous, but it helps us think about our situation and broker new relationships with our environments. And I think that's very helpful framing for what I want to talk about in this lecture. So I'm going to outline ways in which scenography is a form of material thinking, and I'm going to look back across research from the beginning of my journey through the middle and to some more recent work to do that. So, as Chris says, before becoming an academic, I had developed practical knowledge and understanding acquired from being a designer for several years. That was tacit, embodied knowledge about how design communicates and how it affects people, how it can elicit feeling and meaning. The part-time practice-based PhD I undertook was an opportunity to test that out. My question was, how does scenography communicate to its audiences? And I made performances to explore with audiences how scenography works independently from texts, how spectators make sense of materials. In The General's Daughter, this was a post-dramatic performance that I devised and staged with a visual narrative. A main starting point was a Paolo Rego painting. But it had no text. After the performance, I asked the audiences to talk to each other in small groups, and I just asked them to think about what they saw, what they thought, and what they felt. And from this, I could see that there was both a collective and more individualised responses to the design, as well as drawing on cultural reference points that people held in common to locate meaning. They also drew on their own highly specific memories and experiences to connect with what they were watching. So following this, I wanted to find out more about that, more about the individual experiences, the more visceral and embodied feelings that design could evoke. And in the next performance, Homesick, the audience were inside the design, a 3x3 metre room made of canvas walls. The performance happened around them. The spatial and multisensory nature of the scenography was really heightened in this setup. The imagery and influences in this performance were children's nurseries, relationships between mothers and their children, and care homes. This time, the first thing audiences were asked to do in response to the performance was to draw. Matthew Reason, who has used drawing to investigate how people watch theatre, often children, says drawings themselves provide a kind of evidence of experience, but the ambiguity of visual representation means that using the drawings also as objects to initiate and mediate subsequent conversations is valuable too, and that's what I did. The person who drew this said it's a small figure in a very large house, a lonely person trapped in one room in what could have been endless possibilities in a huge house, but stuck in one room. I think they were responding to the spatial dimension of the design and the feeling of enclosure and entrapment. This person described their drawing like this: an impression of whiteness, diffused light, traces of things happening beyond the light, things in the past, like a brass rubbing. I think they were focused very much on the feeling of the performance and its atmosphere. In this example, the participant focused on the sensation of moving air in the space and connected it with other imagery of their own. They said, it's a drawing of a face blowing wind like on old maps. Wind and generation of air, a sensory experience. The cloth, the way we were gradually moved into the corner, the cloth got bigger and took over the space. Part of the concern about design as theatrical spectacle that I mentioned earlier is that people are made passive by being dazzled by effects, design effects, being wowed, being seduced or persuaded without using their critical faculties. But the homesick audiences demonstrated several different ways that they were actively connecting with the performance through the design. The drawings indicated a kind of exchange, it seemed to me, of images, ideas and feelings, an exchange between the performance I had made and the performance each of the audience members experienced. And this exchange was often triggered by the materiality of the performance and the feeling of the air that was displaced by silk cloth, for example, being moved, or the wobbliness and semi-transparent canvas walls. And it was translated into kind of new scenographies, I think, in these drawings. The audience's individual relationship and connection to the scenography that I had initiated produced multiple amended and augmented versions of the original. The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty talks about perception as a reversible relationship between the viewer and the thing being viewed, a kind of intertwining or exchange where things pass into us as well as we into the things. And the sense of my participants experiencing this exchange through their whole bodies in that way of a reciprocal relationship, I think was clear. Merleau-Ponty describes it as an embodied recognition or a kind of an affinity with what's in front of the viewer. The quality, light, colour and depth which are there before us, he says, are there only because they awaken an echo in our bodies and because the body welcomes them. I'm going to skip now to some work kind of post-PhD. In this performance, I wanted to further explore the idea of the agency of audiences and materials that I had been investigating in my PhD, and I wanted to look further into the collaboration of human and non-human matter or stuff, as Chris offered earlier, and the way in which scenographers might emerge through a playful engagement with materials. So this performance centred around a suspended circle of silk strips, like a clearing in a forest. There are objects and materials. They were construction paper, charcoal, confetti, white gloves, masking tape, small beanbag puppets. And after a kind of induction, where me and my collaborators, Rosie Hannis and Isla Watton, demonstrate how combinations of these objects and materials might make and unmake scenes, the audience participants were invited to explore for themselves. The materials each have their own way of inviting interaction. The soft silk strips glow in the light and they brush delicately across arms and faces. They float slowly back into place after being moved. The confetti tends to stick together and invites a particular kind of handling, very different from stiff paper. In order to witness the twirling, slow descent of the confetti, you have to handle it in a particular way, and when you do, then you get that beautiful movement through the air and you can hear the quiet patter as it patterns the floor. The charcoal is smudgy and crumbly. The puppets sit neatly in the palm of a hand. I've got one here, look. Sit neatly in the palm of a hand. They tend to stay where they're put because they're beanbags, but their loose limbs flop and swing, bringing an unpredictability to their presence. Participants in Homesick mostly discovered that to follow what the materials themselves wanted to do by being attentive to them was a more rewarding approach than trying to impose form on materials. I've lost my... oh, that's right. Rebecca Schneider has written as recently as 2015 that theatre practitioners have long recognised the capacity of, that whilst theatre practitioners have long recognised the capacity of theatre materials to act as agents, most theatre scholars have generally considered living humans to be the only agents. Now, this is really starting to change, and research that grants the materials a dynamic role in the making and audiencing of performance. Thinking here of things like Minty Donald's work with water, where she's using performance to explore the human environment interdependencies, or the way that Peter Eckersall talks about materials now as part of the expanded repertoire of empathetic engagement for audiences, I think are really starting to change this dialogue. And in my own work, I have challenged underlying assumptions about theatre design. Number one, the assumption that performers bring the dead things to life bring the dead things on stage to life. Materials can perform, can speak in their own language and have their own vitality. Number two, the reduction of design to merely the visual. It's multisensory. It appeals to your own body, your whole body, not just your eyes. You can feel the light change in the pit of your stomach. You can sense movement, weight, and texture of costume that even someone else is wearing. You don't have to be wearing it, you just have to witness it. In your own body through processes like kinesthetic empathy. Or if you're near enough, you can smell and feel the movement of air on your skin. And third, the mistrust of the visual and theatrical spectacles, dismissing that merely as cheap thrills and appeal to the body rather than the intellect. This hierarchy of sensibility assumes that rational intellect is always more profound and meaningful than the production of feelings, sensations, memories, imaginative connections, and reveries. The way scenography communicates is complex and multisensory, layered and multidimensional. It communicates differently, but no less meaningfully than conventional language. Another strand of my research and its effect on perception has involved me in using my experience as a spectator of other people's work. And I'm going to look at an example now. This is the work of Quarantine and the designer Simon Banham. This piece of work takes place in the Old Granada TV studios in Manchester, and the participants are 30 or 40 people, not actors, but people from Manchester, different ages and backgrounds, and they're speaking about their lives in Manchester. They're responding to prompts to move, to dance, to talk about themselves. There's a section in summer where the participants each bring on an array of stuff from suitcases, laundry bags, and storage boxes. They unpack more stuff. Books, magazines, clothes, ornaments, a feather boa, a flamenco dress, toy, stuffed animals, quilts, cushions, coffee pots, clocks and shoes, a dressmaker's mannequin, a one-person tent, an umbrella, a plant in a pot, a wooden tulip, a pink guitar, and, I think, some bagpipes. As the participants stand behind the objects carefully laid out in front of them, I wonder about the provenance of these objects. Are they really their own? Do they attach special significance to them, or has Simon Banham curated and edited them to create an effect of ordinary life? What empty spaces have they left in rooms across Manchester whilst on temporary loan to this performance? At first, the objects seem as though they could be intended to say something about the people they belong to, or seem to belong to, and are used by, as conventional stage props do. But it isn't possible to read them in that way because there are so many. They fill the grey dance floor with colour and texture, hemming in the participants. Next, the participants are asked to bring some order to the clutter using their own ideas of how. So they use different and overlapping categories: colour, texture, toys, shoes, all kinds of organising principles. And consequently, objects are moved and placed and then removed and placed elsewhere on the grey floor. And these self-contained objects become a fluid river or movement of things, accruing new associations and new meanings as they move from one group to another. My experience of summer was one of being caught up in this unfolding event and responding to and engaging with the spatial and material dimensions of the performance and the space itself. I felt myself to be part of an active space that included a shadowy backstage behind the seating, populated with people and things that enabled this event. I had a sense too of the relative thinness of studio walls and of Manchester and of a Manchester beyond them. That was being mapped out by the performers on the stage. As the cast responded to questions about their lives, places and objects and images of other spaces were invoked. So the references to sitting around a kitchen table, trying to sleep in a flat above a nightclub, and the familiarity with streets and neighbourhoods. Through this, they drew in a world beyond the studio walls and provided glimpses of how the environment inflects their lives. Gradually, I began to sense a dense network of relationships between bodies, spaces, and materials that extended beyond the stage space into the entire studio and out into Manchester. I had the feeling of escaping the boundary of my skin and seeping into the living, breathing city. Generally, as I've already suggested, the contribution of non-human entities in the theatre has been ignored, and as Paul Ray says, it's been actively obscured in favour of self-conscious displays of human creativity, stress there, and virtuosity. However, the Scenography for Quartet shows that things of all kinds make an active contribution to the ongoing formation and feeling and meaning during a performance. Banham's designs don't impose form on objects. They support a dynamic spectatorial engagement through entanglements of human and non-human things, and with the performance and the real lives of the participants on stage and in the audience that are braided into it. That example from Quarantine helps me turn now to looking at how scenography draws on the subjects and materials of everyday life, and thinking about how scenography can help us in investigating urban environments. The philosopher Gernot Böhmer says, scenography offers a theoretical model for thinking about the theatricalization of everyday life that manifests in the staging of sporting, cultural and political events, as well as in marketing and urban design. In particular, he says, scenography knows how to generate atmospheres through set design, light, sound, and attune the audience to a particular mode of performance. Scenography as a profession can be thought of as the craft of tuning spaces, he says, and can be applied to things like creating the ideal conditions for shopping. But this falls back again on this narrow idea of scenography as a tool of suggestion and manipulation and control. It can be used in that way for sure, but it's only one way, and it's a way that assumes that the public are mere observers and consumers. In any case, in urban environments, we are not only faced with deliberately designed and planned and tuned spaces that seem to discipline and regulate behaviour. Much of urban space is mundane or haphazard and, above all, dynamic. In their book, Seeing Like a City, Ash Amin and Nigel Thrift say, cities are spatial radiations that gather worlds of atoms, atmospheres, symbols, bodies, buildings, plants, animals, technologies, infrastructures, and institutions. They are entities and networks that intersect and collide with each other. I think there are strong echoes here with what I was trying to say earlier about how the agency of material in scenography works. This line of thinking was thrown into sharp relief for me personally in lockdown. And I don't know about you, but I was really reminded about being able to go outside and thinking about how the environment affects me. So I started to try and record some of these kind of moments of insight. This is one of them. This would normally be my route to work, but I'm working from home, still disorientated by lockdown and the unfolding pandemic. A rusty old structure used for advertising is being taken down, and the plastic mesh is newly installed. I haven't noticed it before, and now suddenly I see it backlit by early morning sun. This structure appears as a massive intersecting lines and angles that spill across the pavement, seem to dissolve the solidity of the structure, making it blend and connect with the trees and the road. It's an ordinary place that has been profoundly transformed in that moment, an ugly structure being dismantled, suddenly beautiful overnight. I feel touched and implicated in this revelation. Maybe everything will be all right, I think. Here's another one. I've turned off a well-lit main road and into this shortcut that runs steeply down the side of the General Cemetery in Sheffield. The gradient of the path pushes my toes to the front of my trainers. The walls are narrow and damp with moss and overhanging trees enclosed. A security light from another building selectively highlights the graffitied wall. I always think twice about taking this path, but it's exciting too, so I usually do take it. And this morning, it makes me feel energised and alive. Tim Ingold talks about the people's relationships with the world and says it should be viewed as immersive and dynamic. The open world that people inhabit is not prepared for them in advance. It's continually coming into being around them. It is a world that is of formative and transformative processes. Perhaps it's through what sociologist Catherine Stewart calls ordinary effects that the world is constantly coming into being. Ordinary effects, she says, create atmosphere or small scenes that have the capacity to affect mood, imagination and bodily disposition. The ordinary effects of the urban make themselves felt when things seem to coalesce and when there is, as Stewart says, a sensation that something is happening, something emerging from the charged atmospheres of everyday life. What if we think about urban spaces like scenography? Notice how the materiality of scenography that is apparent in the theatre has equivalence in everyday spaces, if we want to tune into it and become more alert to these ordinary effects. Over the last couple of years, I've been piloting workshops that investigate the idea of attuning to the scenographic qualities of urban space and the charged atmospheres of everyday life, and how that might help us better understand the complex materialities of the urban, how they affect us and how they make us feel. In this workshop, which was conducted on the university campus, I asked participants to attune themselves to the environment, to notice, particularly through their whole body, what the effect it was having on them. To notice the air, to notice the temperature, the light, the weather, the scent, sounds, their bodily contact with the floor, the grounds and the surfaces, and their structures and openings, viewpoints, frames, and relationships and correspondences between them. And here's some of the particular questions I gave them. Do I feel comfortable or welcome, invited? Where do I feel wary or cautious, and so on. And you'll see that final question there, which is very much from Kathleen Stewart. Is there a feeling of something that has just happened or something that is just about to happen? So, so they were asked to capture their feelings on in whatever mode they preferred. Most of them did use their images on smartphones, and then we used a modelling process to further develop that idea to express a sense of how the environment was working on them. This is one person's observation, the Tetley Garden, which is quite close by here, and they were made particularly aware of the sound shaping their experience of the space. People walking behind her at a higher level, you can't see it in this image, but they kind of come down into that garden from a higher walkway. And it made her feel like being surrounded in a kind of sphere. And the sound was heightened. She was particularly aware of somebody there eating their lunch, opening a bottle, eating crisps. And the sound beyond was very muffled. And so she tried to kind of model this as a sort of headdress, as a way of kind of capturing how that being in that environment felt to her. The card, as it turned out, bends and moves near her ears and works a lot like the space did to isolate and focus the sound. This model came from an observation by somebody who was feeling kind of overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that they were noticing and being affected by. They were trying to get some distance on it, and he modelled himself as a little tiny figure here, just there it is, signed. A tiny green figure at the edge of this garden courtyard space. Masses of greenery packed into a concrete box was how he was talking about this model. The red card, shaped into curls, was the kind of waves of heat coming off the buildings. It was a very hot day when we did this workshop. And thinking about the sense that things couldn't breathe. Reflecting on the workshops, participants reported a deeper sensitivity to their relationship with the environment and more palpable sense of their bodies in the space through the first part of the workshop. The modelling allowed further exploration and processing of these feelings, even where participants felt they'd failed to capture what they set out to create. The talk that accompanied the work was revealing in the choices that they had made. Models too can be static, fixing an idea, distilling fleeting ideas into what seems like completed objects. But these models, I think, mostly reflect the flux and contingency of multiple and ambivalent space, especially when combined with the talk about what people were trying to do or thought they were doing. I'm exploring further this application of scenography as a method in interdisciplinary research that seeks to understand the way urban environments affects individuals. This could benefit the ways we conceptualise and practice the planning and development of urban space and address the cultural, social and economic inequalities that are built into cities. I also want to better understand the efficacy of using scenographic approaches in combination with, or maybe in contrast to, other creative methods, and how they could facilitate a creative and a reflective engagement for citizens themselves. So using scenography as a lens is a way of imaginatively engaging with how things appear to us and how they feel to us as individuals, as distinct sentient bodies of all different kinds, and how they might be different. And in that way, scenographic attunement might help to recognise and resist dominant narratives of neoliberal urban space and construct alternative subjectivities. This is the wrap up now, just in case you were wondering. An important thread that runs through my research is scenography as a form of material thinking. Scenography as material thinking draws on the multisensory and affective experience of environments in the theatre and in everyday life. Paul Carter has written about material thinking as a process of creative research through art making that allows us to think differently about our human situation, a process of becoming oneself individually and collectively in a particular place. His focus on the experience and expert knowledge of art, his focus is on the experience and expert knowledge of artists, whereas I have tried to think about audiences or participants or citizens as well as scenographers. But like Carter, my concept of scenography as material thinking centres on human collaboration with materials and their creative capacity and their intelligence. Scenography as a mode of material thinking supports the recognition of how spaces appear as constructed and composed, how light and sound modulate spaces over time, how the coalescence of materials might lead to a feeling of something about to happen, a place of safety and comfort, a challenging and difficult space. Scenography as a method of research invites imaginative and exploratory responses to familiar places in ways that can reveal underlying feelings and individual perspectives on shared spaces in theatre and in everyday encounters with the environment. Meanwhile, scenography as an artistic and theatrical form, rather than a method of research, has been expanding, and some of the ideas I have outlined here have helped re-articulate these new directions in scenographic practice worldwide. And referring again to the Prague Quadrennial, in June, the 15th edition of the Prague Quadrennial of Performance Design and Space will be held. It's the largest international festival of theatre and stage design in the world, and it will take place this year, and the artistic concept for the contributions identifies specifically the physicality and materiality of scenography that has become central to design practices aimed at creating encounters between people within particular places. Okay, that's sorry, I didn't manage that very well, but that is the end of my talk. Before I finish, though, I've got one last thing to say. And at the risk of turning this into some kind of award acceptance speech, I really do need to acknowledge the work and knowledge of other people. Becoming a professor relies on advice and encouragement from other experts in the field. You can't do it on your own. Many of the people named here are part of the small but growing international community of researchers that I was talking about earlier. And they are people who have asked questions, suggested developments, and helped me to significantly develop my research. There are many others here too that are not named, people associated with scenography research networks in the UK and worldwide who have made a real difference. And there are many colleagues in the School of Performance and Cultural Industries and in the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures, and several of you are here today. Thank you for your interest and encouragement. I also want to thank the students on my past students and the current students on the Masters of Performance Design programme and my PhD students who give me countless opportunities to re-evaluate and expand my thinking. Finally, sincere thanks to the support of family and friends and to all of you for coming. Now you can go.